altogether.
Off the top.
The Denver Nuggets have agreed to a 3-year, $90 million contract with star forward Paul Millsap. Sources tell ESPN.com. Millsap averaged 18.1 points, 7.7 rebounds, and 3.7 assists last season with the Atlanta Hawks.
Yeah, apparently not the only rebuilds going on in Atlanta as they get ready to open up the new stadium down there that we talked about some last week. It's a full rebuild for the team as well. They traded Dwight Howard last week. Over the last year, they've lost all-stars Al Horford and Paul Millsap in free agency and traded Jeff Teague and Kyle Korver. So stripping down all the parts there, going to be filling that new arena with somebody. We just don't know who yet.
And that's interesting. We're going to have this conversation a lot today about what the NBA looks like and what your reason for hope is. But Atlanta definitely making a statement, right? Their reason for hope is not this year coming up, but several years in the future. It feels like they're loading for the future.
But come to the arena. You can get a haircut, and we got Topgolf simulators.
Would you get a haircut? And would you trust with your clean head, would you trust a barber in an arena to cut your hair?
I wouldn't waste their time with my hair.
Here's my worry, though. Like, there's an exciting play, something big happens, and all of a sudden somebody jumps and bam, you got a mohawk, and you didn't expect a mohawk.
Exactly. You know what? Maybe it's time you switch to the mohawk then. Maybe it's a sign.
That's a strong look for you. You could do it. I'm going to go 5 for 5 here.
Off the top.
Nailed it. According to ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski, Carmelo Anthony, a 10-time NBA All-Star, is open to waiving his no-trade clause to join the Houston Rockets or Cleveland Cavaliers should those teams create a pathway to a deal with the New York Knicks, league sources have told ESPN.
Yep, Chris Paul joining James Harden, the MVP runner-up, has also put the Rockets into strong consideration for Carmelo Anthony. They established his interest with them, sources also said. So it now seems like a two-team race for Carmelo, although we thought that about Paul George and a number of other guys, and then an Oklahoma City trade later, all of a sudden we're singing a different tune. So certainly something to keep an eye on with him.
Do you think there's any chance that all of this just blows over and Carmelo ends up, if he comes back to New York, does he come back happy?
Listen, it doesn't seem like any of that relationship there will be salvaged, even post Phil Jackson. What makes you happy at this point then becomes the question. If you're Carmelo, are you happy the way we've heard about him being a member of the Knicks, living in New York, having that that proximity to his family and his son there, who we saw with him in some workout videos over the weekend making an appearance? Or does happiness change now? Are you in that twilight and you say, I want that championship, I want to pursue this finally?
From Off the Top, we go to What's Everyone Talking About. It's brought to you by Jersey Mike Sub. Be a sub above. And we just got you caught up on a ton of NBA stuff in the Off the Top, and it raises a real question because this was a highlight weekend for the NBA. When you think about it, the NBA regular season has not been near as much of a topic of conversation as the offseason has been, because it engages all the fan bases, and all the fan bases are coming to this moment, and they're having this moment where they can feel excited. So we can look at the NBA and say over the course of the weekend, it was interesting. But my question to you, Mike Golick Jr., did it get better? Did the NBA get better and more meaningful next year during the regular season based on what happened over the weekend?
I would like to think so, because you got a little bit of everything. You got Blake Griffin agreeing to that long-term deal to stay in Los Angeles with the Clippers, so he's something for them to build around there. We talked about Toronto and their young core of Kyle Lowry and Serge Ibaka and DeMar DeRozan, who is still under contract and going to be there. So you've got, all right, some guys stayed put. They gave us that ideal. And then you had guys that joined up. We got a little more, not necessarily super team level yet with some guys, but what we got in Houston, what we've now got in Oklahoma City, it's all very excited. It all leans west a little bit. The Eastern Conference is going to be what appears to be the easiest walk in the park LeBron James-led team is, although a LeBron James team has had in a while, although we hear he's not actively involved in the recruiting process for that team. So it raises a lot of questions, I know, for Cleveland faithful about what they believe his future to be there.
Well, let me ask you a little bit, because your conversation there about super teams, it feels like it takes several pieces. So I like to use, because I'm old, I like to use the Voltron analogy. You're too young for that. But,
you're very sneaky old. You're like a vampire.
I'm Thank you. I think I don't know. Thank you. I don't know.
No, it's a compliment
for everybody my age. Voltron, you had all the little robots, and they would come together, the little cars, and they would build one massive robot. So that's what I feel like the NBA super team structure is at this point. It's like Voltron. You have to get enough pieces. There are moments here, and you mentioned specifically Houston, Oklahoma City. They've brought in a couple of pieces. In your mind, is that sort of an attempt to make Oklahoma City and Houston relevant this year, or are those the building blocks towards what they hope can be a super team for them in the next few years.
I think a lot of those are short-term plays, especially the Paul George one. There's a little more volatility to it. A lot of people in Oklahoma City read that as that front office trying to send a message to Russell Westbrook, who they're trying to woo with one of those 5-year big-time max contracts that we just saw Steph Curry get over the weekend as well. So a short-term play for him, maybe you can convince him to stay, and everyone else along the way just trying to basically plug gaps and do the best they can. A lot of these players are smart, and we've seen them structure their deals with these short-term deals to give them that flexibility, and now teams have to try and work in that new world order.
You mentioned the players and the leaning west. According to ESPN's annual NBA rank, 13 of the top 14 players in the league now play in the Western Conference. LeBron James, not shockingly, the only player that does not. So when you think of that, I mean, what's that say to you?
Well, and that's the most daunting thing as we look forward towards next summer, because as lit as the NBA offseason has been so far, we know the names that are supposed to come up in free agency next summer and be available. And it's a pretty incredible looking list when you're looking for drama. Maybe some guys that are a little bit past their prime. But if LeBron James all of a sudden goes west the way a lot of people think he might, is it even worth having an Eastern Conference playoffs?
Well, and let me be very clear here, because a lot of people have a problem with players going and uniting and trying to form these super teams. I know that's a conversation for everybody. For me, I don't have any issue with it. I always look at it. It doesn't matter what your job is. If you can go join a bunch of guys that are really great, if you're a musician, and you can go in and say, hey, I want to play with some of my best friends that happen to also be incredible musicians, and they happen to be in this band. You go do it. If you do radio, if I have the opportunity to work with Mike Golick Jr., I want to work with Mike Golick Jr. because, darn it, he's just so good. You know, there's
yeah, unfortunately, I don't think that's going to win us any award anytime soon. But,
no,
yeah, to your point,
won't.
like, going and joining up with a band that you think has a pretty strong chance of winning a Grammy.
Right.
And then you can just happen to play with a lot of your friends. But, a lot of this has come from a place of, is what anyone's doing even worth it in the NBA? And that's the one thing we probably need to get away from at this point in the offseason is seeing every move and saying, well, they won't beat Golden State. Like, there's got to be a different metric for measuring the success of a move, like there used to be in a world before Golden State where all we cared about was championships, and that was all that we brought up in this, because that mentality is what creates Kevin Durant jumping over to the Golden State Warriors and say, well, all you care about championships? I got you on one of those.
Mike and Mike, presented by Progressive Insurance. Here's our guest list for today, and it's huge. I mean, we're biased, but I think this is a huge guest list. At 6:30, Joe Tessitore going to join us. Royce Young at 7, Dan Dockich at 8, Bobby Marks at 9. All phone guests join us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. If you miss any of them, you can listen to all 4 hours of Mike and Mike on demand in the ESPN app. So to tie that in, you're sort of saying the point isn't to defeat Golden State. That can't be the only metric at this point. Let's say it that. That can't be the only way you judge pass or fail. And when I think about that, it sort of makes my mindset go to where the mindset is of a mega fan in the NBA right now. Has the NBA, in some ways, has it become like college football, where you know that you're going to have an Alabama that's at the top? And some years, somebody's going to find a way to beat Alabama. But for the rest of the teams, how do they judge success? I mean, conference championships, bowl games, those are all metrics that are accepted in college football as ways to sort of measure a good season or a bad season. I feel like it's okay if the NBA takes that same model. I feel like it's okay if the NBA stands up and says, hey, for their fans, what matters this year, if you're a fan in Oklahoma City, is you want to see a better basketball team that's entertaining, that puts on a good product that you want to spend your money on. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Well, it's got to be relative to your orbit, like wherever you're living, like Oklahoma City. We mentioned their goal is to keep Russell Westbrook or one of those guys hopefully long-term there, so they have something to build around, because they've never really had to worry about that problem. They came over from being the Supersonics with Kevin Durant and company in tow, so they were good. They were going to have a quality product there. If you're a team like Atlanta who just stripped down parts, you've got a new arena, you try and sell them and say, hey, we're going full rebuild on this one. We're not going to wallow around like the Knicks have done for the last few years in this weird, trying to compete anonymity, knowing that your team ultimately can't match up. And then if you're everyone else on down the list, where do you fall? Houston, you go out and add Chris Paul because you think, all right, we're pretty close. We got that series in San Antonio. Didn't go well for us, but we've got to climb that mountain before we can get to the top.
Well, and it can't be lost on everybody that at some point you have to feel like Golden State is going to hit some sort of a wall, be it a contractual wall because of the luxury taxes they'll have to face, or be it a wall that, at some point they can't keep everybody. There has to be some level of hope, and it might not be hope for this year, but it is an eventual hope. The luxury tax is going to play a huge part in how Golden State has to move forward.
Well, it's going to play a huge part in the NBA going forward, because with all these Supermax deals, with the amount of money going out, that's all we keep hearing is owners need to be willing to spend. That's been something LeBron James has been lobbing at the Cavaliers ownership for a while now, which is, I don't care what it takes because I know how much I'm bringing you. Over the weekend, Steph Curry gets that 5-year, $201 million contract, and LeBron says he's still underpaid based on how the value of that team has changed since Steph's rise to prominence and the success that team has had. So when you've got all of these owners showing, all right, we're willing to break the bank, now it becomes, how far are you willing to go in that luxury tax, knowing especially for teams like Golden State, you're getting ready to open up a new arena, extra cash coming in there, new TV deal coming up in a few years, extra cash that's going to be coming in there, all on down the way, but not every team is going to have that luxury, and so that becomes the arms race, sort of like what we always hear in college football with recruiting, to kind of continue that mantra. If you would introduce pay for play, then you have these schools that have all of the resources. You still have some of that NBA has tried to even out in these small markets with the Supermax deal, maybe working a bit differently.
So Bobby Marks, ESPN insider, who again is going to join us at 9 o'clock, according to him, the Warriors will pay a $43 million luxury tax bill this year, a number that could jump to $223 million by 2021. And keep in mind that the Warriors will open a privately funded $1 billion arena in 2019 and 2020. So as much as we talk about the dismantling of the Warriors, don't you also have to have some mindset for them? You're not going to open a new arena and just cut all of the stars. I mean, you can't just come in and say at that point, hey, guys, I know we've been great for years. We're cutting everybody come in for the haircuts. Like, that's not going to work.
Yeah, the Atlanta model will wait and see the success or failure of that. But you're right. It's important to bridge that with a comparable product. And worth noting there that word privately funded, the NBA sort of feeling like the anti-NFL at this point. So much of the conversation around the NFL stadiums comes from the fact that public funds are built into that. It stresses taxpayer dollars. And I always find it interesting when we start getting the paydays across the NBA, especially because of how it shakes out, because you've got max deals that guys can sign on the top end. So you get guys that fewer people have heard of getting money. And we heard, NFL players. Sammy Watkins was very open this weekend saying NFL players need to tap into some of this big money. But fans have to love this, seeing ownership spend their money on their team in a way that seems to always be the cry from the stands in any given sport.
Mike and Mike, presented by Progressive Insurance. More independent agents sell Progressive Insurance than any other brand. Find an agent at Progressive.com. Now that's Progressive. And if you're just tuning in, we're Progressive. We hope. Mike Golick Jr., I'm Jason Fitz. We're sitting in with the guys and getting you caught up on the big news throughout the weekend. You talk about privately funded, publicly funded. Obviously, I think most taxpayers would look at it and say this is a fantastic model, and it feels a little bit easier to accept the salary numbers you see in general when you realize that those same owners are spending their money on stadiums. I realize that. I feel like the interesting part for Golden State is that they are going to essentially avalanche. It's going to snowball, and that snowball is going to hit a wall, and that wall is either going to be a massive luxury tax payment or it's going to be the dismantling of a team. And I don't think you can do it. So I think that has to sort of play into the minds of the rest of the NBA. When you go back, you said which orbit you fall into. Well, it depends on what orbit you fall into. But if you are an orbit that you think can compete, you've got two different ways to do this. You've got the 76ers way to go in and say, hey, we're going to just bank on the future and we're going to trust the process.
Always important to trust the process.
Always important to trust the process. But then they turn around and they add J.J. Redick. They add somebody that can contribute to that team on a one-year deal that doesn't cost them a ton of money. So it makes a lot of sense the way they're building over there. What I'm not sure I can wrap my head around is for the other side, when they're trying to figure out how they want to build, I'm not sure I can wrap my head around how the second, third, fourth, fifth best teams build to the point that they can be better than Golden State. I don't know if the NBA needs it, but that's where my head gets stuck.
And I think we've seen some of that already this offseason, but I want to get to this note before I forget it because it's talking about how that's going to snowball for Golden State. Now, they've won championships in 2 of the last 3 years. That lone other year was Cleveland. According to Forbes, the Cavs lost $40 million in their title-winning season, the most of any team in the league because they paid a $54 million luxury tax bill because of that $115 million payroll. So they spent $185 million on its roster, the second highest single season total in NBA history. And it sounds like Golden State will shatter those numbers if it comes to fruition, all these different things. And so it shows you what a task they've got. They had a tough weekend trying to bring back Andre Iguodala, trying to bring back Sean Livingston, the guys that were glue guys in their roster. And we already saw kind of a preview of what it's going to take, the finagling on their part, to make this work.
It's interesting because we always talk about athletes and what they're willing to sacrifice. That's what everybody wants to talk about. Kevin Durant goes to Golden State. He wasn't willing to sacrifice enough to win. And you hear that conversation. Here's a team deciding, hey, what's a championship worth? We always ask that question, what's a championship worth to a player? At what point do you ask, what's a championship worth straight out to a team? Because what I'm seeing there is a team that is saying, hey, I don't care how many hundreds of millions of dollars I have to spend. I want to continue to win championships. Isn't that, in some way, if you compartmentalize any fandom out of it or any business mind out of it, just the mentality that a team will spend that kind of money for a championship is kind of amazing. I think it's kind of awesome.
That a team will spend that kind of money, that one of its star players will take less money so that they can bring back a guy like Andre Iguodala. All of that adds up to exactly what the rest of the NBA is so afraid of, a group that's that committed to winning.
Well, we'll continue the conversation, obviously, throughout the course of the morning. A ton of NBA news to go through. Straight ahead, a unanimous decision in the Pacquiao fight, but fans were unanimous in thinking it was wrong. Joe Tessitore is going to join us. We'll break all of that down. But first, Mike.
A word from Shell. Hey, listeners, there are a few ways you can get rewarded. You can get that promotion at work, or hit the winning jumper at your pickup basketball game, or play the sick card when your in-laws invite you over. That's rewarding, no doubt. But here's an easier way to get rewarded: by filling up at Shell. Because now when you join the Fuel Rewards program, you get rewarded with instant gold status. That means you save on every fill every day. So basically you never have to pay the full price at Shell again. That's like a reward every time you fill up. It's their way of saying thanks for choosing Shell. And come on, don't you deserve to be rewarded? So join now at fuelrewards.com/ESPN, or pick up a Fuel Rewards card at a participating Shell station, or download the Fuel Rewards app to join. It's easy, so many ways to sign up, so much savings at Shell. Join now. Back after this, it's Mike and Mike.
It's Mike and Mike on ESPN Radio, ESPN2. You can tweet us at Mike and Mike on the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed. Got a few coming in here. Kevin on Twitter says, at Mike and Mike, sports are supposed to be games about competition. The fact that athletes get paid is a bonus. Don't compare a sport to a job.
I don't know what nonsense this is in reference to, but those are two warring crowds, I think, that we mistake for operating in just conflict with one another, where it's either do your job, it's a job, or sports are a game, you should be lucky to get paid. Like, reconciling those two is impossible.
And I think that at some point it is no matter what you think of it personally, for the guy that's doing it, it's a job. It's how he feeds his family. It's how he provides for his future. So it is a job. And in that situation, just because he has a job with a better payoff than most of us doesn't mean that he doesn't get to choose his work environment the same that the rest of us would get to. So I get a little fired up about that one. So that's a good tweet. Did you see any here that stood out to you?
Yeah, I think you look at the jerk tweets, and they need to restructure the conferences. The East has been a joke, and that's going to be the interesting thing me and you talked about before the show, is when is the sort of redirect? When is that correction where all of these guys that have gotten into this glut of talent in the West finally look out and say, you know what, I've got a pretty easy path to the finals, a la what LeBron James has been doing for the last 7-8 years now, if I can just go back eastward.
Yeah, well, and if you realign, then what are you going to do every time? There was a period in the NFL where obviously the AFC was just being destroyed by the NFC in the 80s in the Super Bowl. If they'd realigned everything, what would that mean now? I mean, you can't realign just because you're in a period of time where one conference is a little more dominant than the other. Rico points out NBA doing something right. Everybody's talking about NBA offseason. I think that is a good point. It's absolutely happening. It
is. There's a lot going on. It hasn't stopped since the NBA Finals. We'll see how far it keeps going. Pause for 10 seconds. Back after this.
It's time for Straight Talk Wireless, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, no contract. Mike, you're listening to Mike and Mike, ESPN Radio, ESPN2. Mike Golick Jr., I'm Jason Fitz, sitting for the guys, presented by Progressive Insurance. We need to have a conversation.
What's going on?
You were a fantastic follow on Twitter, by the way. And I don't just say that because, we're friends. I don't just say that because you work for ESPN. You tweet out entertaining things that make you scratch your head. But I was a little...
Fair assessment.
I was a little... let's say, thrown back yesterday. And again, as somebody, I lived a lot of my years on a tour bus touring as a musician. I've eaten a lot of things off the floor that I'm not proud of on a tour bus. I'll admit that. But yesterday you went to Twitter to express your eating habits in a particular place, and it kind of stunned me.
I don't know why it should shock you. You've known me for long enough at this point. For those that don't know, Jason and I did a college football show on Mondays on ESPNU last year, so got to spend a lot of time and a lot of meals together. So none of this should be shocking to anyone. But yeah, I was in the Indianapolis airport. I was coming back from a wedding. I was in a bit of a rough state. Full disclosure there for obvious reasons. And so I bought myself a nice airport hot dog. And, they hike up the prices a little bit once they get you past airport security. And so when my hot dog took a tumble down onto the floor, I had a choice to make. And it was like time stood still. Like, how they talk about the 5-second rule? Everyone was asking me about that. I have no idea how much time passed. Could have been 5 seconds, could have been 5 minutes. But I was locked in that moment trying to decide if I was going to prioritize my own happiness. And I chose joy. I chose that hot dog, dusted it off a little bit. Shout out to the Indianapolis airport, by the way. Impeccable floors that I found out afterwards.
Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable 4G LTE network. There's a couple things here. One, we share something in common there because inherently you're cheap. And that's what that says. You don't want to go buy another hot dog.
No, God.
I'm with you. Once you spent that hot dog money, you're not going to spend hot dog money twice. That's not going to happen.
I don't got hot dog money yet.
You might as well just get a steak at that point. You can't do that. But the second part of it, and I'm not particularly proud of this, is I wanted to give you a reason for hope. So I actually, at the time, I Googled the 5-second rule because there's been a few medical studies on the 5-second rule. So I was like, I'm going to give him support. However, it looks like it's not so much about the length of time, it's about the amount of bacteria on the floor. So I was hopeful I could give you scientific research that says 5 seconds was going to be okay. Turns out it's not.
I'm pretty adept at spotting bacteria, though. It's one of my unique skills. And looking down at the floor after the fact as I was trying to, quickly clean up all of the mustard and relish and everything else, that I felt bad because I had mucked up what looked like a really nice, clean floor. So I thought, all right, if there's any floor in any airport I can eat it off of, darn it, Indy, I'll choose you every time.
Well, and you didn't mention the relish and mustard and such on it. I mean, you can easily wipe that off and start clean. It's the same hot dog at that point. So
it is, but it also gives more places for the bacteria to glom on. Believe me, I thought this out. This was in the moment that time stood still. All of these things were passing through my mind, and somehow on the other end, it got me to the point where I knew I had done way worse than this. So I would have a lot easier time reconciling this internally, and that's all that matters.
The really smart people that help make the show happen, because it's certainly not the two of us, have pointed out that the Mythbusters guys tested the 5-second rule. It was busted. It is all about the bacteria on the floor. But I thought of you in a sports context with this last night, because here I am sitting, getting ready for the show today, and I'm going through all the notes, and I look up at the highlight reel, and I see Yasiel Puig, and he's not pleased, and then he has this moment with his bat where he decides that when he's not pleased with the way he's swinging, apparently he now does this. So he doesn't like it, walks away, and licks the bat.
Ooh.
So I looked at it and I said, you know what? If Puig can lick the bat, you can certainly eat the hot dog off the floor. That was my defining moment. I came to your aid in that defining moment.
I appreciate you and Puig helping me out on that one. And I wonder if they're going to look into it. Is that doctoring the bat? Can you do that? Is he going to get one of those envelopes from Rob Manfred that's like, nah, man, you got to quit all this bat licking?
That would be amazing if that was some sort of a new thing that we find out he's got something in his saliva that helps his bat. I can't imagine it, but it just seems like, the bat's been in the clubhouse and it's been on the ground and it's been flipped around. On Friday night against the Padres, Puig made a catch and kissed the ball out of his glove. So,
I have no problem with that.
So you are now the Puig of ESPN.
Hey, I'll take that. I mean, I'll take the Puig, maybe like 2013 Puig. I'd like to be a little bit more of that one, the all-star level Puig, but I'm fine with almost any Puig. He's a fun guy, kissing bats. What's the worst that comes out of that? I came from a sport with much grosser tendencies as far as the way you operate. I mean, Mark Slayer had the very storied history of peeing his pants that I proudly continued during my playing days. Oh, yeah.
What?
You've never heard that?
Okay,
you missed that by now?
You drop that nugget, I'll drop a music nugget on you. Slash, I learned in his autobiography for Guns N' Roses, switched to leather pants because he used to have a problem not peeing on himself during shows. So he switched to leather pants because you can't tell that he peed on stage. But then later in the same book, he reveals that he would go weeks and not, like on tour, they'd go weeks and not wash their clothes from the tour, which means he peed in the same pants over and over and over again.
That's a guy, you know what? That's a musician that I can respect. That's a guy going out there and putting it all on the line. That's not going to be stopped for anything like that, because I can't imagine that you were dedicated enough to pee your pants during a show ever.
I was not. No. I didn't. I didn't. Now I feel like less commitment to the cause.
Exactly. Puig, Stink, and I will be over here peeing our pants and licking bats, and you can be over there doing God knows what you're doing.
I just have to ask: has that tradition stopped as you are now transitioned out of playing? Because this would be a comfortable thing for you to tell the people that work around.
They keep these cameras above the table for a reason.
This is what I deal with every single. Yeah. I thought I'd give you a little hope. You know, that hope seems to be the message of the NBA offseason, right? Hope is the message for all of the fans out there. I'm trying to give you that same level of hope. That's what I'm trying to accomplish.
I appreciate you. I know that some of your planning coming in here at 4:20 this morning, getting here way too early, was a part of helping me out of my pee pants situation. So I appreciate that.
It always is. It always. Don't forget, coming up straight ahead. Obviously, we've got a lot of good guests coming up and joining us on the show. Performance Line over the course of the morning. Royce Young is going to join us up next. We're going to continue through the process of the show this morning to break down sort of what the NBA landscape now looks like, because I think the greatest question is it better? Will the regular season next year be better than it was this year based on what we've seen so far?
Yeah, and the Thunder are a team that I don't think I expected to see pop up in this conversation, but we heard that apparently this deal had been in the works for a while. Be interested to get Royce's perspective on this, as now not only do they land that star for the short term, Paul George, who made his future plans clear, but can maybe lure their other star into staying for longer.
Well, straight ahead, the Thunder pick up one star, but they lose another. Are they any closer to the Warriors in this process? We'll look at that. You're listening to Mike and Mike on ESPN Radio. We switch to ESPN News. Next up, Mike Golick, Jason Fitz. We're in for the guys.